Okay, now we are on. Folks, today we're going to go to a place that it's not exactly off the beaten path, because if you have an extra half a day in Jerusalem, that's one of the places that you would like to go and see. It's only about 20 minutes away from the city, and this place is called Herodion. When you hear the name Herodion, of course, you connect it with King Herod the Great, one of the Herods, and that was indeed his magnificent palace and his burial place as well. There was an Israeli archaeologist by the name of Ehud Netzer that spent his lifetime to try to find Herod's tomb and his sarcophagus, because Josephus Flavius, the historian, who is the main source that tells us the story, says that Herod died in Jericho and they carried him on a golden bed and buried him in Herodion. You do expect a great builder like Herod to build himself an amazing mausoleum. And it took about 40 years for this individual, Ehud Netzer, to try to find Herod's tomb. And he's convinced beyond any doubt that 10 years ago exactly, 2010, he did find a large sarcophagus that was not that beautifully decorated, but he came to the conclusion that this is indeed the coffin or sarcophagus of Herod the Great. If you go to the Israel Museum today, you can see parts of it. They only found it in pieces. They tried to put them together. And the problem is that Jews were not buried in sarcophaguses. Jews were buried in a small boxes called ossuaries. After the flesh had decayed, they used to collect the bones and place them in a small box. And that will present a challenge. Was Herod buried like a Jewish individual because he was a converted Jew? Or maybe based on his own will, he was buried more like a Greek or a Roman, which means sarcophagus, we don't really know. And not everybody agrees that what was found is indeed his sarcophagus, but of course it's a possibility. The story has a tragic end because the same individual, Ehud Netzer, the archaeologist, he came to the site watching the workers are working and digging, and he was leaning against a wooden rail that collapsed under his body weight, and he fell down into a pit and died out of his injuries in the hospital a few days later. Everybody was so fascinated how appropriate that Mr. Netzer would die in the place that he dedicated his life to find Herod's sarcophagus. So Ehud Netzer was the name of the individual that excavated the place. And based on his conclusions, he did find the sarcophagus of Herod, so mission was accomplished. So we're going to go to a place now which is close to Jerusalem. We're going to speak about King Herod the Great, the builder. We're going to say a few words about another episode in Jewish history, which is called the Bar Kokhba Revolt, that we don't know much about, but we do know that the Bar Kokhba rebels were also using the same fortress that was built by Herod, so we'll divide the story kind of into two. As always, we'll use the presentation. I'll try to fit in some video clips without embarrassing myself too much, as I usually do, and I try to bring those up. But of course, I know that you are people of lots of patience and you're all friends, so you'll bear with me if it will take me minutes once again to bring up the information. Well, let's start with the presentation. And as always, I need somebody at least to give me a thumb up to see that the whole thing is working. And I hope it does. Yeah. Well, we always start with the famous slide that shows you the desert. And we're going to go straight in and zoom in to speak about Herodion. If you've been there, which is a possibility, with the bigger groups, many buses, we usually cannot include that in our schedule. But if we have one bus and we have some time, it's always recommended. You can see this place from a distance. It's a man-made hill, basically, and it's hard to believe. But just like Masada was one of the main projects of Herod, so was Herodion. What you see in front of you looks like a crater of a volcano, like a table mount, basically. Part of it, it's man-made, and that was one of 7 fortresses that Herod built in the desert. The story is similar to Masada, and we'll speak about it in some details because Herod's biography has something to do with this location. That's why he chose the place and decided to make a fortress out of it and a palace and even his burial place. So Herodion is the name of the place, and on the map you see it's south to Jerusalem, very close to Bethlehem and on the way to Masada. And there was a connection between those places, as I'll share with you in just a minute. Just to remind you the story, when Herod was king over Judea, the Roman, Persian, or Parthian border was very close to Judea. The Romans needed an ally to watch the border, and Herod was a choice made by the Romans to be king, and that was a violation of the biblical protocol. Let me remind you that according to the Bible, the individual who should be the king of the Hebrews, that has to happen under three conditions. If you go to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 15, the Bible says very clearly, the king of the Hebrews has to be a Hebrew, and Herod was not. When you go to Genesis 49, when Jacob is blessing his sons, when it comes to Judah, he said that the scepter will not remove from Judah until Shiloh comes, believed to be the Messiah, which means that the king of the Hebrews had to be a Hebrew Israelite from the tribe of Judah. And only centuries later, after King David was asking permission to build God a house on Mount Moriah, God's answer was, you will not establish my house, I will establish yours. Which means that the king of the Hebrews had to be an Israelite, had to be from the tribe of Judah, and had to be from the house of David. And these rules were kept for a long time. It was the Maccabees that violated that rule, and they made kings that were not from the house of David. But in the days of Herod, it was a total violation of all the biblical criteria. So Herod was a choice made not by the Sanhedrin, not by the people, but by Rome. He was what we should call a client king, and he ruled in Rome's behalf. And his kingdom was basically occupying at least part of Rome's borders. And for that reason, the Romans needed somebody they could trust to guard the border. And it was one reason to make him king. This place was an area that was always under a potential of an invasion by the Parthians. And you want to have somebody you can trust to be in such a critical location. And Herod, from his side, he was building fortresses in the desert, and we've been to Masada with the Herodion, but 5 others as well. And the reason to build the fortresses was basically places of refuge. The king was not very safe in Jerusalem. The masses were not really for Herod in many ways. He was representing the hated Romans, and he was holding his position by violating the biblical procedure. And for that reason, sometimes he had to flee from Jerusalem when riots broke out. And he needed places of refuge, and he built 7 fortresses. The problem was, if you want to build a fortress, you better ask permission from the Roman authorities, because building a fortress without permission, it's an act of rebellion. And the question is, how do you present your case? If you tell Caesar, sir, I'm not very safe in Jerusalem, I do not control my own city, that was not the kind of king that Rome was interested in. And therefore you have to present your case very carefully. And Josephus Flavius tells us that Herod very cleverly told Caesar, Augustus, Octavian, sir, you gave me a kingdom. My kingdom occupies part of the Roman-Persian border. Let me help, not for my sake, for Rome's sake. Allow me to build fortresses in the desert. Each one is going to guard a potential invasion route into Rome's territory. I want to be part of the Roman system. If you present your case in such a way, permission was given, and Herod built 7 fortresses, Masada the most famous one, and Herodion was his, let's say, crown jewel, if you wish. Herod had a lot of warm sentiments, and we do not know if he ever visited Masada. We know for a certain that he visited Herodion, and quite often. So this was the motivation, and this was the reason why the fortresses were built, and Herodion was 1 out of 7, the closest one to Jerusalem, and therefore the easiest one to go to. So that will be the location. And let's speak a little bit about how the whole area looks like, and give me a minute to try to explain that. You cannot have a 3D kind of a slide in front of you. But the slopes of the hills are coming down this way from the area of Bethlehem, and this is the area of Bethlehem today. And the slope is coming down this way from Herodion, that was half man-made, but half a natural hill. And that leaves a very narrow bottleneck that goes right through here. This was one of the roads that connected the Jordan Valley on the right with the mountains. And we do have another biblical connection. You do remember the Magi that went to Bethlehem after Jesus was born there, and they were warned in a dream not to go back the same way they came because Herod is after them. And the Bible says they took another way to go back home that had to be the road that went right through here. They came to Bethlehem from Jerusalem. This will be the area of Jerusalem. They took the highway to go down to Bethlehem, but since they were warned in a dream not to go back the same way, That was the other alternative, to take the road that went right through here and went down to the Jordan Valley and back to the homeland. So we do speak about a place that strategically is very significant. When you go from Jerusalem down into the Judean desert, you have to go through that bottleneck, and that's what made the location so important. Here is what Josephus Flavius tells us about why Herodion and not any other place. And of course, if you have access to the book of Josephus, you have the whole information over there. He tells us that after the Roman Empire occupied Judea and took it from the Maccabee dynasty, the Hasmonean supporters did not give up very easily, and they recruited their followers time after time. And within 25 years, 5 major battles were fought between the Hasmoneans and the Romans. In all of them, the Hasmoneans lost. In other words, the Hasmonean family was totally crushed with all the other Jewish aristocracy, except for one. One prince was called Mattathias or Antigonus, that was his Greek name, and he decided to seek Persian help, and he went to Persia, and he was able to convince the Persians that if they're willing to send an army with them, the masses in Judea will support the Hasmoneans, and that would be a Parthian advantage to invade and occupy part of Rome's territory. And most likely the man had the skills and he could convince the Parthians. They agreed, and they sent an army with Antigonus into Judea. And the last prince of the Maccabees or Hasmoneans was quite successful at first, and he was able to conquer Judea, and Herod had to run for his life. Which when Herod, after losing Jerusalem, after his brother was killed in battle as well, somebody by the name of Fatzael, he took his mother with him and took his bodyguards and started his flight from Jerusalem down to the area of the Jordan Valley and into the desert, and he went right through here. And Josephus tells us when the whole entourage arrived here, his mother Kippos, that was mounted on a horse, the horse tripped, and she fell off, and the Parthians were right on their tail, and Herod thought that she died at first. That's what Josephus tells us, and he decided to establish a line with the bodyguards and to fight back, and he won the battle. And therefore, Herod had some war sentiments regarding this place, understanding how important is the location, and for that reason, he chose this place to build his, let's call it secondary capital or backup to Jerusalem, in case you have to leave the town in much haste. And the whole place was prepared to be as a small town, as an administrative center. It wasn't populated by people, but by state officials, and that would be a place to flee to if things were getting worse in Jerusalem, to consolidate your forces and go to try to conquer the city, as it happened when Herod lost Jerusalem. By the way, he went all the way to Rome. He was anointed king in the Senate. That was 40 BCE. And with Rome's assistance, he came back to Judea, conquered Jerusalem, executed the last king of the Maccabees. And that's when he started his reign. And that was the 37 BC. By the way, a small ossuary was found in Jerusalem with a name on it, Mattathias Antigonus. So we do have today the bones of the last Jewish king, the very last Jewish king that was a legitimate or semi-legitimate, because the very last Jewish king that we can point at will be Herod Agrippa II, a person that you also know from the scripture, simply because his mother was Jewish, and he would be the last, if you want to count legitimate kings, at least by the mother's origin. So that will be the location, that will be the reason. And from that picture, you can see the lower city that covered this area here, and that's how it was found. And we'll see the upper city as well, or the Acropolis. I do want to point at this location right here. This was a water reservoir. That would be the main water system of Herodion. Water was carried from the mountains of Bethlehem. It was the same water source that supplied the temple in Jerusalem as well. And one aqueduct carried water all the way down to this water pool. And in the center of it, there is a large platform. When Mr. Netzer started his excavations looking for the tomb of Herod, that was almost obvious it would be right here. That's what brought his attention. And he dedicated some time to see if he can find something in the area, but that was in vain. And only then he was searching the mountain until, as we said, in 2010, he claimed to find the sarcophagus with Herod's no bones inside, by the way. So that's how the place looks like today. It was built as a palace, was built as a fortress, and as a mausoleum as well, Construction started at 23, went for about 8 years or so, and that will be the elevation. We have to say that King Herod, and those of you who are with me on the seminar, Greco-Roman Judea, will dedicate a whole session about Herod, the greatest builder in antiquity, but his reign is divided into two, basically. When he started, there was a lot of confusion in the Roman Empire. Rome was in a civil war. Herod was under the patronage of Mark Antony, who was the king or the ruler of the East. And Mark Antony was engaged in a long war with Octavian. And after the Battle of Actium, that was the name 31 BCE, Octavian won the battle, and he will be known by the name or the title Caesar Augustus. And Herod had a problem. He was very loyal to Mark Antony, and his main concern was that Octavian will not approve him as king because you were loyal to my enemy. How can I trust you? And Josephus tells us that the first 10 years in Herod's reign, he was uncertain about his position. He hesitated to invest in construction. All he cared about is to fortify his position. But after Caesar Augustus approved him as king, only then Herod moved to phase number 2 and started building really like crazy everywhere by building mountains and building temples and building all around the Roman Empire. So Herod's reign officially started maybe at 37 BCE. But he took his position as real king and dedicated a lot of time to construction only after he was safe on his throne, and that would be after the decisive victory of Caesar Augustus over Mark Antony. By the way, in Jerusalem, the main castle is called the Antonius Fortress, named after Mark Antony. So not before the Roman Empire calmed down under the Roman peace, Herod could be comfortable in his position and start investing in making a name for himself, basically, and that was part of the plan. So Herodion, Temple Mount, all the big projects were not built prior to 30 BC, only after 30 BC. So that's how the mountain looks like from a distance. And this will be an aerial view to show you. It looks like a volcano's crater, but of course it's not a crater, it's all man-made. And you do see it's not a big place. The town itself was down here, but the fortress or the palace was quite small. And you can also see that bedrock is about on this level. Everything else, big retaining walls were built, and they were simply covered by dirt that the king's slaves and construction workers were brought from the area in order to create this man-made mountain. By the way, Herod had a division of 10,000 stonemasons, and they were busy always in construction. The temple was the main project, but so was Caesarea and Samaria and Herodion and Masada. 10,000 well-trained people and paid, of course, not slaves, were engaged in building the country, basically, and Herodion was one of these projects. I do want to show you this sketch because it tries to explain how it used to look like. Look now to the right-hand side. This will be the lower city. That will be the main pool and water reservoir, and all around will be government offices, basically, and dwelling places for the official staff of King Herod, almost like small palaces. When things are getting worse in Jerusalem, you can always flee to this area, block the road here, which is a strategic location, and occupy the place. So this place was occupied constantly, but most of the people who lived in the area were state officials, and maybe they divided the time between Jerusalem and here. In both cases, we speak about part of the Jewish aristocracy. Herod's official personnel, including bodyguards, were Germans. Herod did not trust the people of Judea to guard him, and therefore we speak about the German bodyguards that he recruited to protect him from his own people. So that's how the town looks like. This will be the man-made mountain, and the fortress will be on the very top. This will be the lower city, and the Dead Sea, by the way, will be someplace down here. If you zoom in to see how the palace looked like, not very big as you can tell. It had 4 towers. I do want to go back to show you from here. There were 4 towers at the 4 corners, not very big. And there was a central one that was the Watchtower. This one was divided to 7 stories, right? 7 stories. So this place was basically the royal apartment, and that will be the main fortress of the fortress, the dungeon, if you wish. And you do see, we speak about a very high structure that had a great commanding post over the whole region as well. Unlike other places like Jerusalem, that everything was made from huge blocks and with no connecting material, here it was built in a different way, unlike it was in other parts of the country. So that's how the fortress, that's how the town used to look like. We'll focus, of course, on the palace. The town is under excavations, and not that much was found so far. The focus was always on the fortress. Well, that's how it looks like today with all the excavation. They're still working over there. And of course, you can go through the mountain, because if you go all the way down through the mountain, that's where the water system used to be. And that will be the description of Josephus Flavius, how beautiful and how magnificent was the palace that Herod built for his own pleasure. And again, this is what Josephus tells us about the location of the place and about the place itself. Some pictures to demonstrate the splendor of the palace. They are still working on the theater, and the theater had some booths, if you will, that were especially for the officials that came to visit, and they found these beautiful decorations over there. It's very delicate, and the plaster is not in such a good condition. When you go to Masada, which is deeper down in the desert, very dry, the plaster was kept in a much better condition. The area of Herodion and Jerusalem, it's very humid, and therefore they had to very carefully restore it, but that's how it used to look like, the typical combination of colors that you find in every Roman villa, the Pompey red and the green, you find at Herodion as well. Look at this nice mosaic. Well, Herod was not fully Jewish, of course, but he respected the Jewish law, and therefore when you go to places built by Herod, you won't find any images. Even on the coins that he minted, there are no images. And therefore, you have to be very sensitive to your Jewish subjects, although you're entertaining a lot of non-Jews as well, and part of your staff were not Jews, but officially at least, you will not have anything that will be a manifestation of paganism. Otherwise, you do have a major problem among your Jewish staff as well. You do see how it used to look like. Josephus speaks about the flight of 200 stairs that connected the lower city with the fortress, and these stairs were found. And now it's being excavated. The job is not done yet, but they're excavating now those stairs, and some of them are in situ, and that's where the mausoleum of Herod was. We have to say if, because there's no consensus among scholars if this was indeed Herod's mausoleum and where exactly it was located. You do see a pile of stones here, and that would be your indication that Herodion was conquered just like Masada in battle. When the Zealots started their revolt against Rome, Herodion was one of the places they occupied, and Josephus doesn't mention a battle. Josephus only speaks about Masada and Michvarus, that's where John the Baptist was beheaded, as places that the Romans laid siege around. He's not mentioning anything regarding Herodion, but when you find those piled up anywhere, this would be your indication that heavy fighting took place around Herodion. This would be a group of stones that the Romans will get together to use in the catapults, or maybe it was rolling down the hill. The Jewish zealots rolled them down the hill on the Romans. It's really hard to tell, but the fact that they were arranged such a nice way, most likely it was from the Roman side. So this is one indication that the place was taken in battle and people did not just leave the area. There was a small bathhouse as well, like in any Roman palace, and part of it, the ceiling is still intact. This is the only place in the country that we have a complete Roman structure, including the ceiling. You go to places like Temple Mount, etc., as impressive as it is, pieces are missing. And this is interesting to see that you do have a whole dome, if you wish, with a hole in the center of it, and that will be part of the frigidarium or the cold room in the bathhouse of Herodion. The water system, we need to say a few words about it. Always amazing when you look at the water system and how much efforts were dedicated to that. Look at the size of it. This is inside the mountain. I did mention to you earlier that the pool in the lower city, that will be the main water reservoir, which was indeed the case. When you speak about such a high mountain, it's hard to bring water to the very top, obviously, unless you're using a siphon. But in the siphon, the origin of the water has to be higher than the destination, and that was impossible to accomplish when it came to Herodion. The place was so high. And therefore, people had to carry water with jars and buckets, if you wish, from the lower pool and fill up the cisterns that I'm trying to show you, which means those cisterns had to be full of water all the time, because if the fortress comes under siege, it will be very hard to protect the lower town. It will be easier to protect the upper town. And for that reason, this had to be filled with water all the time. Look at the size of it. 4 like this were found. And you do see how high is the plaster. The plaster goes all the way up here. which means that everything here was filled with water, not all the way to the top. That's why the stairs are coming down this way. But when the zealots occupied the place, they connected the top of Masada with the tunnel to go directly down here. Until then, as we said, you would carry water, you had access to it from the outside, but the zealots simply abandoned the lower city and fortified themselves in the fortress, and there was no other way to get down to the cistern unless you dig a tunnel through the mountain, literally through the mountain, and that was the zealots' addition to have access to the cistern, not from outside, but through the mountain. They connected the water system with the mountaintop, basically. So that's how some of the cisterns of Herodion look like. It used to be a hiding place later on for the Bar Kokhba rebels as well. Let me pause it for just a minute and see if I can bring up a little video segment. And I do hope it's going to work, although there's never such a guarantee. No, here it's not working already, but we'll make it work in just a minute. I made some preparations. Just tell me if you can see. Yeah, it's there.
Spectacular place in Israel is Herodion, named after King Herod the Great, and was indeed one of 7 fortresses that he did in the desert, not that far away from Jerusalem. But Herodion was the one that carried his name as well, and by his wit, that's where he was buried. He died in Jericho to see his promised status, and his golden head was carried by German bodyguards all the way from Jericho, climbing the mountains of Judea to his final resting place that was here in Herodion. Herod had some special sentiments to this location, because when he was under an attack, the last time that one of the descendants of the Maccabees was threatening Herod's position, was a prince by the name of Mattathias Antigonus. He was able to recruit the Persians on his side to support him, to try to defeat Herod and reclaim the throne for the line of the Maccabees. And that was a success at first. He was leading the Parthian army into Judea. Herod was under siege in Jerusalem, and then he had to flee after his brother was killed in battle and losing part of his army. And as he was withdrawing from Jerusalem, and the Parthians were right on his day, he stopped right down here. His mother Kypros was thrown off her horse, and he thought that she may have died, and he decided that this is where he's going to establish a line, to try to stop his persecutors, to try to stop the Parthians, and he did for a while. And therefore, this place was a place that he was really attached to, and maybe for that reason, he decided to build that as one of his main fortresses, one out of 7, and to proclaim that to be his burial place. It's a man-made mountain, amazing, and the whole castle was built here, and then they built a hill around the castle, so from a distance, it looks like a volcano. It looks like a big table now, but again, everything that you see around you is man-made. So that will be the last resting place of King Herod the Great. It was in Israel, Israeli archaeologist by the name of Heroin, and Herod was his main obsession. In 1967, this whole area was in the West Bank in Jordanian hands, but right after the 1967 war, this place was liberated by Israel. Herod started looking for the tomb of Herod the Great, knowing that he may not be able to find much of it, because after Herod, who considered to be a tyrant by the masses, died, everybody knew, including Josephus, that says that they're not going to treat his tomb with respect. And therefore, he knew that it's going to take a while. And he was looking for nearly for 40 years all around the mountain, tried to find the tomb with no success. But then, 2007, after many years of looking, he found it. Well, he found a sarcophagus, and he was in the opinion that that has to be Herod's tomb. And he found pieces of beautiful frescoes that were decorated, and based on that, they reconstructed the whole way how this mountain palace used to look like.
Okay, where is it? Where am I? How come I'm not on? Just a minute, be with you in a second. All right, well, we covered some of it already, so I don't want just to take too much time with something that we covered already. But once again, let's go back now to the presentation and carry on. Well, as I said earlier, not everybody agrees that what was found is indeed the tomb of Herod. I'll give you some pros and cons in just a minute. But this what was found basically as a base for a large structure, a large mausoleum. And again, look at the quality of stone masonry here. This is quite amazing. You do see the details around here. It was found in the most unexpected location. Nobody looked for it in this area. And the question is why being buried in such a location, such a place? As I mentioned to you in the short video a minute ago, Herod knew very well that once he is dead, the masses will not treat his mausoleum too nicely. He was really hated by the locals. And therefore, maybe he decided that his position of the tomb should not be that obvious, although it was a big tower that you see from a distance. So we do not really understand the location that he chose. The view is beautiful, obviously, but you do see the level of stonemasonry and the quality of it that basically indicates not only good taste, but high skills of stonemasons. This is the sarcophagus. You do see the pieces that were found. Well, it's not beautiful enough, so to speak, to be considered to be Herod's sarcophagus, but again, maybe he didn't want people to identify which one is his, not to destroy it and not to treat it disrespectfully, so we do not have all the story. By the way, just to demonstrate what was the relationship between the king and the people, well, Herod was in Jericho when he was sick and he knew that he is about to die, and he also knew that this is going to be a day of celebration among the Jews in Jerusalem. So he ordered his German bodyguards to gather all the Sanhedrin from Jerusalem and bring them down to Jericho in the stadium and gave them an order. Once he is dead, they should execute all of the Sanhedrin, so nobody will be happy in the kingdom when Herod dies. Well, fortunately, his German bodyguards were too clever not to carry out his orders. But you do understand what kind of a relationship the king and the people had. They were not best friends. So again, the question is it indeed the sarcophagus of Herod? They found 3 sarcophaguses, or sarcophagi, as they say it in Greek, basically. And maybe it's possible Ehud Netzer was convinced that this is indeed Herod's sarcophagus. And again, it's a possibility. A small theater was found as well and being excavated as we speak. I was there about a month ago, and that's what they do most of the work now, is to excavate a theater, not a very big one, about 450 people or so, which is only for special guests. It fits all the protocol of Roman theaters in Judea. It's facing north because the sun is never really on the north, so you can watch a show without having the sun in your eyes. And once it was found so far, the booths up here are beautifully decorated, and they're not going to move anything. They're going to leave it over there, just cover it with some glass so you'll be able to see it from the outside. They're not going to take it out and bring it to the museum. Sometimes they do. This is going to stay in the location, so definitely worth a visit next time that you are in the country. The model that they have today on the side, the scale is about 1:7. And once again, the decorations of the sarcophagus. The question is it indeed the tomb of Herod? Well, it depends who you're asking. It's very hard to have 2 archaeologists sharing the same opinion. Today, most people, most scholars do believe it was, but there are some reservations about the location, about the style of decorations, about the beauty of it. Well, go figure, it's a possibility. After the death of Herod, this place was occupied by a Roman garrison, as all fortresses in the Judean desert. And when the Zealots started their revolt, Herodion was the first place to conquer. Besides the first one, Herodion was maybe second to establish a line of citadels and fortresses that will be occupied by the Zealots. And since when Herodion was built, there was no synagogue, there was no need for a synagogue, but the Zealots needed one, just like in Masada. They added those benches around here, and that became to be the gathering place. And this is one of 7 synagogues in the country that are going back to the days of the Second Temple. The latest one was found in Magdala. I believe that we've all been to Magdala from the same period, give or take. So this will be the Synagogue of Herodian. This one was added by the Zealots. And they also needed a cleansing facility that Herod was not really bothered with. So they added this one as well, not in a very good condition, but we've seen many of those on our virtual tour. And when you've been to the country as well, you see those mikvahs, cleansing facilities everywhere. So Herodion also had a synagogue, and they had a mikveh or a cleansing facility. The last thing that I'd like to share with you, and I'm just going to switch back to the camera in just a minute, is Herodion in the days of the Bar Kokhba Revolt. Before I do that, let me share something else quite amazing with you. A couple of things. Number one, excavations that Israel is conducting in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria are always a problem because most of the world calls it occupied territories, and I'm not getting into politics. And the question is, does Israel has the right to excavate anything in places which are not under Israel's sovereignty? And that go to some key locations in the country. Herodion is one of them because it is in the West Bank. And therefore, whenever Israel is engaged in excavation, which is quite often, there's always some criticism around the world. Do we have the right to do that? And what was found, are we going to present it in Israel Museum? Because this is basically Palestinian goods, so to speak, or Palestinian property. And again, you can, just totally look the other way and don't really care about all these things, but just so that you would know that excavations in the Golan Heights, for example, and in Judea and Samaria always have some controversy regarding who is the sovereign. Dead Sea Scrolls, Qumran, the very same story, because it's also in the West Bank. So Herodion was part of these stories, but after 1967, of course, we did not hesitate to start excavation. So Israel is not respecting that much the worldview about who owns and who is the place. And we speak about Jewish history. We speak about our ancestors who lived in the area, so we have no such reservations about doing that. But just so that you would know, the world is watching that with a lot of reservations. Do we have the right, yes or no? Second thing is that when you do the excavations, sometimes you simply ignore a few things, because think about the amount of stuff that you find. You find a lot of coins, a lot of pieces of pottery. You take it to a storehouse, and there when you have the time, you're going back and you carefully view what is it that was found. Well, only a few years ago, they went back to sift through some of the dirt that they collected from Herodion. It comes in big buckets, and they just leave it in a storehouse, and they came across a ring. And after they cleared the ring and they tried to see what's written on it, and I have to ask you to trust me for it, Pilate. Again, when you say the name Pilate, it brings your attention immediately to Pontius Pilate. Pontius was not found, just Pilate. So there's some confusion how exactly to understand that ring with the name Pilate on it. It says it very clearly, because the only place outside the scripture the name of Pontius Pilate was found will be in the stone that you all saw in Caesarea, the Plaque of Dedication, some of you may recall, in the Caesarea area. And here is a ring that's made of copper, basically, and you find on it something that you can clearly read Pilate. The question is, who is that Pilate? Not Pontius Pilate, but again, go figure. Was it some kind of an emblem, some kind of a seal, maybe to seal a document? Maybe when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, 26 to 36 AD, they made few rings so his officials can sign some documents with the official emblem of the governor. We don't really know. By the way, the official emblem of Pontius Pilate was like a cane, like a staff, like a shepherd's rod. That was his one. And when he minted his coins, very careful not to offend the Jews so there are no images. That's how you identify one of the coins that was minted in Pilate's days. So a mystery, but quite a fascinating something that was found only recently. So who knows, when they go back to clear some other stuff, what else will be found. The last part that I would like to share about will be the days of the Bar Kokhba Revolt. Those of you that know Jewish history maybe heard about the Bar Kokhba Revolt, but Simeon Bar Kokhba was the last Jewish freedom fighter, if you wish, until 1948, basically. And he led a big rebellion against the Romans. The problem is that he did not have an historian like Josephus Flavius to tell the story. And therefore, we do not have the details about the Bar Kokhba Revolt. What we do have today is given to us by a Roman historian called Cassius Dio, and he wrote his book in the early 3rd century. But his book was lost as well. And therefore, what we have today is the abbreviated version of the book of Cassius Dio that was made by a Byzantine monk by the name of Xiphilinius, forget about the name, and he gives a summary of the book of Cassius Dio. And what we know is only one page, and that Byzantine monk tells us the following. In the days of Adrian the emperor, the Jews revolted against Rome. The whole world was shook by that revolt. The Roman commanders were afraid to confront the Jewish army in the open battlefield, and only after 3 years and 11 legions engaged in war, the Jewish revolt was suppressed. 980 towns were destroyed, 580,000 people were killed, and many Romans as well. That's it. Go figure what is it that we are talking about. But you do understand that was quite an event. Jewish sources are very silent because of one main reason. Simeon Bar Kokhba, that was the leader, and we have his name in the Jewish Talmud of the Jewish oral law, was officially declared by one of the leading rabbis of the year, Rabbi Akiva. He is the Messiah. The only person in Jewish history that the Jewish Sanhedrin officially considered to be the Messiah was Simeon Bar Kokhba. And keep in mind that the Jewish Messiah back then, that's what the Jews are waiting for, was not a suffering servant, but a mighty hero to deliver the Jews from the Roman hands. And since Bar Kokhba led such a revolt, he was officially called by the leading rabbis of the day as the Messiah. I know it sounds weird today, but that was the official name given to him. The problem was that he lost. The problem was that he was not, because if he was indeed, they should end it with a victory, and it ended with a terrible defeat. And for that reason, in Hebrew, there is a play on words. Bar Kokhba was his name, which means the son of the stars. Not his name, just a nickname if you wish. If you change one letter in his name from Bar Kokhba to Bar Kozva, the one who failed us, or the false Messiah. All right, so Bar Kozva, Bar Kokhba, both names are used. But in Hebrew literature, in Jewish literature, Bar Kokhba is hardly mentioned because that was a big mistake, of course, when you look back at our history, to call him the Messiah. But you need to understand the mindset of the Jewish leaders back then, desperate to see a miraculous deliverance from the hands of the Romans. And they thought that maybe Bar Kokhba will be the one. We do know that it was a failure eventually, but we do know it cost the Romans a lot of lives and casualties. And as a result of that, Caesar Adrian was so fed up with the Jews rebelling time after time after time that he decided to rename the province of Judea and call it Palestine. And that's how the name Palestine was basically born, named after the Philistines, until the days of the Bar Kokhba revolt and the smashing defeat that the Jews suffered from the Romans. The place was called Judea. It was Adrian that decided to change the name to Palestine to break any linkage, even a kind of a sentimental between Jews and Judea. So from the 2nd century until 1948, the place was known by the name Palestine and not by the name Judea. So that's the Bar Kokhba story. They found coinage from the days of Bar Kokhba in Herodion. We do know for a fact that Bar Kokhba warriors were using Herodion as the semi-capital because Jerusalem was not taken by them. So Herodion was the center of the Bar Kokhba revolt. So this is another chapter in Herodion's history. And again, there was quite a lot of literature about the Bar Kokhba revolt. If you're interested, you can find that. I did a study on that and my professor was quite impressed. I just made a suggestion about something, my tiny contribution to the country's history. So this is quite a fascinating chapter in the history of the land. Simply because we don't have enough information, you need to collect those nuggets. Just one example to give you. We have a list of the Roman legions from 145 AD and the list of the Roman legions 118 to 145. No major war was fought on the borders of Rome between the two eras, 118, 145. And in the list of 118, the 22nd Legion is mentioned. We do know that the 22nd Legion was deployed in Judea because of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And then we have another list of legions for 145. The 22nd is not there. Now, a legion is only being dismantled, so to speak, or taken off the list of legions under two conditions. If they lost more than 50% of the soldiers in battle, or they did not perform well in the battlefield. Something happened in Judea. Something happened in the Bar Kokhba revolt that we do not have the details. The Roman historians' books are lost. We only have the kind of the abbreviated version of it. Jewish sources are almost totally silent. So you have to collect those nuggets to try to build a picture, which is quite interesting. Another example, the Roman governor of Syria was appointed by Adrian to be the commander. And for some reason, he had to be replaced by the governor of Britain. The Britain governor was the most important governor of Rome, the most skillful one in most cases. There was some kind of hierarchy, who is sent where. And the fact that the governor of Syria had to be replaced because they did not perform well says something. about the size of the revolt, about how the Romans saw the revolt. We have another piece of document, forgive me for bothering with this information, and this is a letter that was sent by a Roman sailor. Listen carefully, a sailor, because he says, listen, you recruited me to the infantry, although I was mobilized as a sailor. My pension as a sailor is higher, but you may pay me a pension for an infantry soldier that served in Judea. Well, if the Romans lost a lot of infantry in the battle and they had to convert, if you wish, some of the Roman Navy to be foot soldiers, that will teach us something as well about the magnitude of the Bar Kokhba revolt. So we don't have the whole story, but we do have those nuggets to try to make a story about the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is also connected to Herodion. Well, folks, this is it for today. If you want to have any questions to ask, by all means, please feel free to unmute yourselves, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions about Herodion, about anything that you may be interested in when it comes to Israel. Nothing. Okay. Well,
I
yes,
got a
please.
sorry. So Golan Heights, what is the significance of Golan Heights? Why is that such a fought over piece of land?
Well, listen, this will take me a long time. But the Golan Heights are the northern eastern corner of the state of Israel today. It was a buffer zone between Syria and Israel. And it has a big advantage because the Golan Heights are much higher than the valley under them, which means if you occupy the Golan Heights, you have a big advantage over the area of Galilee. Until 1967 Syrian territory. In the Six-Day War, Syria assaulted Israel. In our retaliation, we conquered the Golan Heights. Because until then, almost every day, 1948, the state was born. 1967, Golan Heights were conquered. But the Syrian army was deployed on the Golan Heights, and almost every day they would open artillery fire on the Jewish communities down in the Jordan Valley. A whole generation of Israelis grew up in bomb shelters, basically. And therefore, when the place was, I would say, liberated by the Israeli army, it was important enough strategically to be officially annexed to the state. So Israel officially annexed the Golan Heights in 1981. That was an official annexation. Nobody in the world recognized it until 2 years ago. President Trump officially recognized the annexation of the Golan Heights. So there is some international recognition that the Golan Heights should stay in Israeli hands. Even if you want to give it back to Syria, who controls Syria today? And there's no authorities in Syria to take the Golan Heights back or to even work a deal with them. So the Golan Heights strategically is considered by the world occupied territories. We officially annexed it, and there was at least a partial international recognition that the Golan Heights should be in Israeli hands. It's a small place geographically, but it makes all the difference in the world, and it did. In the war of 1973 as well, Israel was attacked by Syria. It gave us just enough buffer to recruit our forces and to stop the Syrian invasion to go deeper into Galilee. Any other questions, folks?
Yes, Ronny, it's Rick. Two things. One is on Herodion, it appeared from some of the photographs that you displayed that perhaps when the site was first discovered, it was maybe not so obvious what was there. The hill is there, the mount was there, but it appeared to be covered or largely covered. Is that correct?
Yeah, but we had the Book of Josephus. Yeah, it was in a bad condition. It was in a bad condition after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And by the way, for a while, it was a monastery. Christian monks moved in and lived in the lower town, down below, not in the fortress. And a place like that, if you don't occupy it, maintain it, earthquakes, it's not solid bedrock, but man-made filling, everything was basically covered. But the people knew about the location. We had an American archaeologist in the 1900s, Robinson, who through the country, he was the first one to recognize Masada, for example. So the place was known, but no excavations were done. Right? The Jordanians had no interest, obviously, for such excavations. So the place was known. What will be found? Well, Josephus tells us basically how the palace used to look like. So they knew the location. They did not say, let's look what that is, or let's try to figure out. They knew that this was Herodion. The place was well documented. What will be the details, what they're going to find, they didn't know. And since they knew that this was Herod's resting place, they were expected to find a huge mausoleum, as maybe they did, maybe they didn't. That's one of those questions and mysteries.
Oh, the stonework is absolutely beautiful on the portion that they think is a mausoleum. It's just gorgeous flat sides and beautiful
Yeah,
seams.
it is. It is. It really shows the high quality of stonemasonry, and somebody spent some money to make it. But again, this is typical Herodian. You go to other places in the country, you expect nothing less from Herod's engineers. Resources were abundant, so for the king's name, obviously you may want to make it as beautiful as possible.
And then, if I could quickly, my second question is, how are the people of Israel feeling and thinking now with the recent signing of the newest agreement with Bahrain?
Well, what can I say? Number one, who can say no to peace? I mean, people are content, obviously. It looks like we're making more friends in the Arab world. You do know that when the peace accord was signed, at the very same minute, there was a barrage of rockets fired from Gaza into Israel. We knew because we understand how the mindset works on the other side. Iron Dome intercepted some of it, not all of it. So again, it will be a lot easier to make peace with countries far away that we did not have a real problem with. We still remain with the Palestinians, and the whole idea was that making peace with the moderate Arab countries, they will side with us to introduce more pressure on the Palestinians to try to get some kind of a deal. That would be the idea. And Mr. Netanyahu wrote a book about 30 years ago, and it was called A Place Among the Nations. And that was an idea that he brought up many years ago, that we should not negotiate vis-a-vis the Palestinians because it's going to be a dead end. We should create a situation that we are friends with the moderate Arab countries, and together the pressure on the Palestinians may be more effective. Now we'll see. So we made step number one, and maybe Oman will be next. We do know that maybe some other countries will be next. The big prize will be Saudi Arabia, but it's not going to happen. Saudi is all for it, but for Saudi Arabia to officially, right, because we do have some connection, but officially to say that will take more than just a gesture, more than just a common interest against Iran. But again, everything happens and things are very surprising. And, we don't know how to digest it. Everybody's a friend side, which is a great thing. Again, we spoke about it the other time that my concern will be, and not just me, that we signed an agreement not knowing what it says. Very simply, nobody knew exactly what the agreement contains. The Knesset did not vote for it. The cabinet never saw the agreement. And I'm sure that it's good. Otherwise, you have to trust the prime minister, okay? But it's not correct democratic procedure. I mean, the way it should go is that people need to know what is it that we are signing. The Knesset should vote for it. The cabinet should approve it. And then you go to sign. And here it was done the very other way around. So the problem maybe is with protocol. And also there is a certain protocol in the world affairs, all right? You don't send the prime minister to sign vis-a-vis the secretary of state, right? It should be the Israeli secretary of state, but then Mr. Netanyahu would not get any credit for it. And it's very important for Mr. Netanyahu to get credit for almost everything. And yes, you hear my opinion in that, right? But it's something very typical. So a few things were a little different, but these are details. And when you look at the big picture, it's a positive thing. And it's a nice gift for New Year's. Tomorrow is Jewish New Year's. So Shana Tova, everybody, or Happy New Year. I would also like to make a short announcement. I have a friend of mine, Nir Nitzan. We are colleagues for many years and partners. And we had a plan maybe 20 years ago to open a small academy to teach about Israel on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. It never really materialized, but the plan was always there. So we are officially on air. And we have the academic program ready, and you recognize some of it because it's what we also did here in a way. But if you want to take the time and go to www.thegalileeacademy.com, all right, thegalilee.com, I think that you'll find a lot of interesting stuff over there. Most of it is free, just free material. We're just beginning, so we are not totally ready. Again, thegalileeacademy.com. We are going to have a section that we call Heroes of the Bible. And we're going to have a casual talk once a week about one of these heroes, something very casual, nothing too formal, that I hope that people enjoy. It's going to be a lot of stuff. So if you think that you want to know more about the country, please don't hesitate to check it out and share it with everybody. What can I say? And if you're not Facebook friends, try to be my friend, all right? I'm very friendly on Facebook recently. I have lots of time. What else can I do? So suddenly I'm very active on Facebook to the level that my daughter tells me, Dad, you're embarrassing. You can't post every day something on Facebook. said, of course I can. I have nothing better to do, so I'm posting things on Facebook. And people seem to like it, so that's a good response. The problem is that Google translates it to English, it's ridiculous. I mean, sometimes, because I write in Hebrew, right? And everything is play on words, and sometimes you read the translation, you say, oh my God, this is totally missing the point. You're totally missing the point with Google Translates. Yes, Barry?
I was wondering, is there any talk at all about what sort of plan you have to resume the tourism industry?
Yeah, well, again, a few things have to come together about resuming tourist industry. Number one, Israel should be allowing people to come in without quarantine, and people need to want to come. As long as we are a red country, not only red, but the highest infection rates per capita in the world so far, unfortunately, not going to happen. So a few things have to happen. Number one, since most of, at least my clientele, friends, people coming from the US of A, the US had to be colored not in red, because right now it's a red country as well. That's how the world categorizes everything. So anybody who wants to come into Israel from the US, that's 2 weeks of quarantine. So nobody's going to come. That's obvious, not on the tour, obviously. So a few things will have to happen. It looks like Moderna is making progress with the vaccine. It looks like we are making progress with the vaccine as well, because having a vaccine is nice, but then to make 4 billion pieces of it, that will take about 10 years. So we do hope that more than one company will have the vaccine. And we'll see. Full disclosure, I have to say, you do know that my father passed away about 10 days ago, and it was COVID-19. It was COVID-19. So we got it as well. I had it, no symptoms. I was asymptomatic, but I did have it. I had to be tested because I was with him. And when he was diagnosed with COVID-19, we knew that it won't take a long time with all the problems that he had. So I had it, my wife had it as well. So suddenly it's a kind of, it's a very personal issue, not something that happens to other people. You do not know how you're affected. And now we're supposed to be immune, all right? So it's all around us suddenly, because once you have it, you need to quarantine about 100 people around you as well. They have to be tested. I have no idea who infected me. Maybe it was my dad, it's a possibility. And he had a kind of a caregiver that lived with him. And she was going out every now and then. How careful she was, we don't know. So maybe she was the one. It's impossible to tell. But it's suddenly something very personal, and not something that you watch on TV and it will never happen to you. So it happens in close circles. And again, in his age, he was 90. And with all the problems that he had, it was just a matter of time. Right? We did not have any illusion that he's going to recover. And the doctors told us right away, if this is indeed a diagnosis, it's just a matter of time. Now, you need to understand that since my brother was diagnosed as well, and myself, we didn't even have a decent funeral. We didn't even see the body. They showed us pictures, all right? And that would be enough. And he was buried with a shroud, but a big piece of bag of plastic as well. And in the Jewish world, you have 7 days of mourning period, of Shiva. We could not even have that, because his caregiver stayed in the house, and she had COVID-19, so the house was not available. And my brother was infected. So it was, we will not miss 2020, let me put it this way, all right? Or the Jewish equivalent. So yeah, things happen, and it happens all around us. Let me just see in the chat, somebody. Okay, Shana Tova. Thank you, Marilyn. Shana Tova to you as well. Well, folks, some of you I'm going to see tomorrow evening, those of you that are participating with the seminars as well. And I'll see you all next Thursday, all right? Next Thursday, we are going to a place called Shiloh. I'm sure that you heard about Shiloh. And I think that's a schedule for next week. And then we'll bring it to conclusion. 5 more sessions to go. The last 3 ones will be in Jerusalem. And then everything that I'm doing with you basically is going to switch to the Galilee Academy, all right? So what I call here Israel Seminars is going to come to an end, and you're most welcome to keep following and joining, but we still have 5 weeks to go until we get there. Any other questions? Any other things that you would like to share, to ask? We'll have a wonderful new year. Eat well, that's what we do for our holiday, just eating well. But we'll be all by ourselves. Families will not get together. There won't be a family celebration. Synagogues, they do have the regulations of 10 people indoors and 20 people outdoors. And crazy, they just publish all the restrictions. You need to have a PhD in order to try to figure out what exactly it means. Listen, the government lost our trust. We do not trust anything they do. They are so incompetent, unfortunately, which is really disappointing. Israel is a country that knows emergencies. We should be better prepared. It's politics. It's politics, and this drives everybody crazy. Nothing is done because that's what people need or the country needs. Everything is done to keep the coalition functioning. And this is just absolutely outrageous. That's the way it works. Vote for me. I may run for presidency next time. And maybe there was a way to fix things. Right? So,
Good luck.
yeah, thank you. So once again, thank you all. And I'll see you basically next year if you go by the Jewish calendar. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Take good care. May the God
Happy
of
New
Israel
Year.
richly bless you all. Thank you.
Happy
Thank
New
you.
Year.
Sure.
Happy New Year.
I mean.
Yes.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.